Imagine buying a simple antique box online only to unleash a terrifying, malevolent force. This isn't a scene from a horror movie. This is the real story of the Dybbuk box, a wine cabinet so cursed it's believed to be the home of a demonic spirit straight from Jewish folklore. What started as a casual purchase at an estate sale quickly spiraled into one of the most infamous modern legends of a haunted object. And it all began with one man, Kevin Mannis. Back in 2003, Mannis attended an estate sale in Portland, Oregon. Among the items for sale was a curious-looking wine cabinet. It was small, old, and strangely alluring, the kind of thing you might pass off as a decorative antique. According to the estate organizers, the box had belonged to a woman who had survived the horrors of the Holocaust. This detail alone gave the cabinet a sense of weight and mystery, as if its very existence carried an untold history. Mannis, drawn to the box for reasons he couldn't quite explain, bought it and brought it home. At first, it was just another antique, but soon, strange things began to happen. Mannis described how he and those around him experienced vivid, disturbing nightmares, many of them involving shadowy figures lurking in the dark. He noticed odd smells filling the air, sometimes the sharp scent of cat urine, other times the overwhelming aroma of jasmine. On top of this, he claimed there was a heavy, oppressive energy that seemed to linger in every room where the box was kept. These experiences unsettled him so much that he decided to get rid of the box. But rather than throwing it away, Mannis took to eBay, hoping someone else might want it, despite or perhaps because of the bizarre events tied to it. His auction listing wasn't just a standard description of dimensions and features. Instead, it was a chilling narrative of his time with the cabinet. He warned potential buyers that the box was haunted, detailing how it brought nightmares, dread, and unexplained phenomena to everyone who came in contact with it. This listing would spark something that few could have predicted. Thousands of people read it, captivated by the mixture of history, folklore, and supernatural terror. The Dybbuk box, as it came to be known, became infamous not because of what it was, but because of the story Mannis attached to it. His words transformed an ordinary antique into one of the most feared objects ever sold online. The word Dybbuk itself comes from Jewish folklore. It refers to a malicious spirit, often believed to be the restless soul of a dead person who refuses to move on. Unlike harmless ghosts, a Dybbuk was thought to cling to the living, causing harm, torment, and despair until it was forced out through religious rituals. By labeling the cabinet a Dybbuk box, Mannis gave it a direct link to one of the darkest corners of folklore, making the idea of owning it even more terrifying. The people who read Mannis' listing warranty, just curious shoppers, they were drawn into a living horror story. Imagine scrolling through eBay expecting to find secondhand furniture or vintage trinkets, and stumbling on a tale that sounds like it was pulled from the pages of a ghost story. And unlike fiction, this one came with a chilling promise that you could take the cursed object home with you. That made it all the more real and all the more terrifying. Those who came near the box claimed to feel the same oppressive energy that Mannis had described. It wasn't just his word alone. Visitors to his home, friends, and even strangers who encountered the cabinet spoke of feeling sick, uneasy, or plagued by bad luck. Some said they dreamed of the same faceless shadow figures. The box seemed to carry with it a sense of dread that was impossible to ignore. What made the Dybbuk box story even more powerful was the blend of personal experience and cultural myth. Mannis wasn't simply saying this thing is scary. He tied it back to Jewish legend, giving it roots that stretched far deeper than his own experiences. To those familiar with the lore, this wasn't just a haunted object. It was a vessel for something ancient and dangerous. And for those unfamiliar, the story opened a doorway into a tradition where spirits could inhabit the physical world in frightening ways. It's important to understand how stories like this spread. In the early 2000s, the internet was beginning to reshape how urban legends traveled. Before, a cursed object might have been a local tale, passed around campfires, or whispered about in a small community. But the Dybbuk box story hit eBay, where thousands could read Mannis' detailed account in his own words. That gave the legend a massive audience, almost instantly. It didn't matter whether people believed it or not. What mattered was that the story was out there, alive and spreading. Soon, the Dybbuk box wasn't just an antique, it became a phenomenon. Paranormal enthusiasts, skeptics, and casual readers alike were fascinated by the possibility that someone could buy a genuine cursed object with just a few clicks. Manus had written the kind of auction description that guaranteed attention, whether you were terrified, skeptical, or just curious. And the more people read about it, the more they passed it along, turning the Dybbuk box into a household name in the world of haunted artifacts. This single eBay listing would eventually ripple outward into something far bigger than Manus could have ever expected. The story didn't stop with him. It grew, passed into new hands, and picked up even more chilling accounts along the way. From a simple estate sale to one of the most infamous haunted objects of the modern era, the Dybbuk box had taken its first step into legend. And this is only the beginning of its story. You've made it this far, and you want to keep following this cursed tale as it unfolds across time and belief? Make sure to like this video, leave your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to Belmoze so you don't miss the rest of this series on the Dybbuk box. This is just part 1, and trust me, we'll want to hear what happens next. The strange story of the Dybbuk box cannot be told without first understanding what a Dybbuk really is. In Jewish folklore, the Dybbuk is one of the darkest and most feared spirits. Unlike a harmless ghost or a wandering soul, the Dybbuk is said to be malicious, restless, and desperate. It is believed to be the disembodied soul of a dead person who has not been able to move on, often because of unresolved sins, anger, or a violent past. Instead of fading away into the afterlife, the spirit lingers, searching for a host. What makes the Dybbuk different from other spirits is its hunger for attachment. It doesn't simply haunt a place, it attaches itself to the living, taking over their bodies and controlling their actions. This is what makes the idea of the Dybbuk box so frightening. The belief is that the cabinet didn't just hold memories of the past, it was acting as a prison for a spirit that had refused to rest. Anyone who opened it, anyone who allowed it into their home, risked becoming its next victim. The folklore surrounding the Dybbuk goes back centuries. In old Jewish texts, the Dybbuk was not merely superstition, it was a real threat, one that required intervention by trained rabbis. Rituals of exorcism were performed to drive the spirit out of a human host, often through the recitation of special prayers or the use of holy texts. These ceremonies were intense and dangerous, with the belief that a Dybbuk would resist violently before being forced to leave. In many cases, these spirits were thought to be so stubborn and vengeful that once bound to a person or to an object, they were nearly impossible to remove. When Kevin Manus labeled the wine cabinet as a Dybbuk box in his eBay listing, he wasn't just picking a random word to make it sound spooky. He was invoking a legend with deep cultural roots, one that carried centuries of fear and respect. To anyone familiar with the lore, the warning was clear. This was not just a haunted box. It was a vessel holding a dangerous spirit. The idea of the box as a container for the Dybbuk makes the story even more unsettling. Spirits in folklore are often tied to places: haunted houses, graveyards, or battlefields. But this one was different. This spirit wasn't tied to a location. It was portable, able to move from home to home, carried by whoever dared to buy or own the cabinet. That gave the legend a sense of immediacy. If you bought it, you didn't just bring home a piece of history, you invited the spirit in. Those who encountered the box reported feelings of dread and despair that seemed to go beyond ordinary fear. Manus spoke about how nightmares spread not just to him but to anyone who touched the cabinet. Others who came into contact with it described unexplained illnesses, sudden accidents, or streaks of bad luck that followed them for days. These accounts matched perfectly with the way a Dybbuk was described in folklore. A spirit that clung to you, draining your energy, causing harm, and sowing chaos in your life. Imagine hearing a story like this, and then remembering the details Manus had shared about the box's origins. It supposedly came from a Holocaust survivor. In folklore, spirits born out of tragedy, war, and suffering are some of the most powerful. The horrors of the Holocaust, the grief and anger of millions of lives lost, created the kind of backdrop that could easily fuel the belief in a restless spirit. The thought that one survivor might have bound a Dybbuk into a box as a way to contain it only added to the fear. If true, the Dybbuk box wasn't just haunted, it was the result of an intentional act, a desperate attempt to lock away something too dangerous to leave roaming free. The story fit together in a way that was hard to ignore. A box connected to immense human suffering, a folklore spirit with a reputation for latching on and refusing to let go. First-hand accounts of fear, nightmares, and strange phenomena from people who had handled it. All of this gave the Dybbuk box a foundation that was stronger than the average ghost story. And because this spirit was believed to be trapped inside an object, it made the danger feel personal. A haunted house could be avoided, a cursed place could be left behind, but a box could sit in your home, in your bedroom, on your shelf. Its influence could touch you every day. That was what made the Dybbuk box different, and why the story spread so quickly. As the legend grew, the details about what a Dybbuk was and what it could do became part of the narrative. Paranormal investigators and folklore enthusiasts began to point out that the symptoms described by Manis and later owners matched the signs of Dybbuk possession recorded in old Jewish accounts. Unexplained illness, sudden personality changes, overwhelming despair, and violent nightmares. The box seemed to be a textbook case of a Dybbuk at work, except that instead of inhabiting a person, it had been bound to an object. Of course, skeptics were quick to question whether the box really held a spirit. They argued that the power of suggestion and the spread of the story could make people believe they were cursed, causing psychosomatic symptoms and coincidences that felt like supernatural activity. But even skeptics couldn't deny how quickly and deeply the story captured public imagination. The combination of folklore, personal testimony, and the accessibility of the internet gave the Dybbuk box a presence that was hard to shake. The most frightening part of the story was not just what the box did, but what it represented. If a Dybbuk could be bound to an object, then it meant spirits could live anywhere, waiting to be unleashed. It blurred the line between folklore and reality, turning a tale from ancient texts into something that could be delivered to your doorstep in a cardboard package from eBay. By this point, the Dybbuk box was more than just an antique. It had become a living legend, one that carried with it the weight of centuries of fear tied to the Dybbuk. And as the box passed into new hands, the terror only deepened. Each new owner brought their own stories, their own encounters with the supposed spirit inside, ensuring that the legend of the Dybbuk box and the Dybbuk itself would not be forgotten. When Kevin Manis first placed the Dybbuk box on eBay, he probably didn't imagine the storm it would unleash. His detailed description of the cabinet, paired with the chilling accounts of what happened while it was in his home, caught the attention of collectors, skeptics, and paranormal enthusiasts alike. What looked like a simple piece of antique furniture was now being presented as one of the most cursed objects ever put up for sale online. The listing itself became infamous, shared across forums and news outlets, and it quickly attracted bidders who were either eager to prove the haunting false or to experience it for themselves. The box did not stay with one owner for long. Each time it changed hands, the stories of fear, dread, and unexplained phenomena seemed to grow. Some buyers didn't keep it for more than a few days before selling it off again. Unable to cope with the strange activity, they claimed followed it. Lights flickered, objects moved on their own, and owners reported that the atmosphere in their homes felt heavy, as though the air itself carried an unseen weight. Even people who had never believed in curses began to question themselves when they experienced the unease that came with the Dybbuk box. One of the most famous cases linked to the box came from Jason Haxton, a medical museum curator who eventually took possession of it. Haxton was not the kind of person who went looking for paranormal encounters. He was a professional, someone trained to analyze and preserve historical artifacts, not someone who chased ghost stories. But from the moment the Dybbuk box entered his life, things began to unravel in ways he could not explain. Haxton reported that the box seemed to carry with it a dark energy. He described physical reactions, burning sensations in his eyes, sudden illnesses, and rashes that appeared without cause. His wife and family also began to feel the effects. Strange ailments, sudden accidents, and an overwhelming sense of dread crept into their daily lives. It was as if the box's influence was spreading beyond just the person who owned it and touching everyone who came near. Even more unsettling were the descriptions of strange shadows and unexplainable shapes that Haxton and others claimed to see. It wasn't just nightmares, though those were common. To it was the sense of something moving in the corner of the eye, something lurking just out of reach, a presence that didn't belong in the room, but was there nonetheless. Many of these experiences mirrored the old descriptions of Dybbuk encounters from folklore, giving weight to the belief that the box truly contained such a spirit. Haxton eventually wrote about his experiences, describing how the box had forced him to confront things he had never believed possible. His account added legitimacy to the legend because he was in T, a random internet bidder chasing a thrill. He was a respected curator, someone grounded in science and preservation. If a man like that could be shaken by the Dybbuk box, then maybe, just maybe, the story was not a hoax after all. But Haxton was not the only one to speak of the terror. Previous owners had also described streaks of bad luck, from financial troubles to sudden illnesses. One college student who briefly owned the box claimed his entire apartment seemed cursed, with electronics failing and strange odors filling the rooms. Another reported that family members fell seriously ill almost immediately after the box entered their home. Each story layered onto the next, weaving a web of fear that was impossible to ignore. The spread of these accounts online only fueled the legend further. Every new report of terror became proof for believers that the Dybbuk box was real. Forums and blogs filled with heated debates. Was it truly a cursed object, or were people convincing themselves that they were cursed simply because they believed the story? Skeptics argued that the power of suggestion was enough to explain the strange experiences. If you believed you had brought a cursed item into your home, your mind might interpret every creak, shadow, or coincidence as evidence of the curse. But even skeptics had to admit that the sheer number of independent reports made it difficult to dismiss entirely. What made the Dybbuk box different from other haunted objects was its traceable history. Most ghost stories are vague, with legends passed down through whispers and folklore. But here was a box with a documented chain of ownership, with multiple people stepping forward to say they had suffered because of it. This wasn't just an isolated tale told by one frightened person. It was a story that had grown through first-hand testimony, written records, and the undeniable connection between each owner. For some, this made the Dybbuk box even more terrifying. If one person's story could be dismissed as imagination, what about 10? What about 20? How could so many people from different backgrounds all claim to have felt the same sense of dread and experienced similar patterns of illness, nightmares, and misfortune? Haxton himself eventually admitted that he did not feel the box could simply be destroyed or thrown away. In his mind, and in the minds of many who believed in its curse, the Dybbuk box was too dangerous to be handled casually. Destroying it might even release the spirit bound within it. The safest thing to do was to keep it locked away, sealed, and under strict control. It wasn't an object to display proudly in a collection. It was an object to hide, to contain, to keep out of reach from those who might not understand its power. The Dybbuk box's journey from one owner to another, leaving behind a trail of terror, elevated it from an odd eBay curiosity to one of the most infamous haunted objects in the world. With every transfer, the legend grew stronger, the stories darker, and the fear more real. And yet, despite the warnings, despite the accounts of suffering, there were always those who wanted to take possession of it. Whether out of curiosity, disbelief, or the thrill of owning something so infamous, the Dybbuk box never stayed hidden for long. The story of the Dybbuk box was never meant to stay confined to online auctions and paranormal forums. By the time Jason Haxton shared his account and word spread of the box's sinister history, Hollywood had already taken notice. The narrative of a haunted antique, tied to Jewish folklore and layered with real testimonies of fear and sickness, was perfect material for a horror film. It had all the ingredients that captivated audiences. A cursed object, a folklore-based backstory, a trail of suffering, and the terrifying suggestion that anyone could be next. Producers quickly optioned the rights to adapt the Dybbuk box story into a feature-length movie. And what followed was The Possession. Released in 2012, the film was pitched as being based on a true story, a phrase that always heightens curiosity and dread. People wanted to believe that the events on screen reflected something real, that the terror wasn't just the product of an overactive imagination, but grounded in actual accounts. That framing made the Dybbuk box legend spread even further. In the film, the box is portrayed as a sinister container that wreaks havoc on the lives of those who encounter it. A young girl buys the box at a yard sale, unaware of its history, and soon begins to act strangely as the spirit inside takes hold of her. The movie draws heavily from the folklore of the Dybbuk, presenting it as a parasitic entity that feeds on suffering and refuses to let go of its host. Audiences who had followed the Dybbuk box's journey online immediately recognized the connection, and for many, the line between reality and fiction blurred even further. The movie was a commercial success. Viewers left theaters unsettled, whispering to each other about whether the story might really be true. Paranormal enthusiasts pointed to the film as proof that mainstream culture was finally acknowledging cursed objects. For skeptics, it was evidence that Hollywood could take an internet hoax and inflate it into a cultural phenomenon. Regardless of where people stood, one thing was clear. The Dybbuk box was no longer just a niche internet story. It was now part of global horror culture. Rumors soon surfaced that the production of the possession itself had been plagued by strange events. Members of the cast and crew claimed they experienced unexplained problems while filming. Lights on set allegedly burst without warning. Cold drafts and sudden power outages interrupted scenes. At one point, a fire destroyed props and storage, leading some to believe that the Dybbuk box had extended its curse to the people dramatizing its story. These accounts added to the movie's allure, making it seem as though the curse was not only real but powerful enough to reach into Hollywood itself. Stories like these aren't new in the world of horror. Other films, such as The Exorcist and Poltergeist, were also accompanied by rumors of cursed productions, where cast members were injured or strange accidents occurred during filming. By connecting the possession to this tradition, the Dybbuk box myth gained even more strength. It was just a creepy story passed along by a few owners. It was now linked to the legacy of cursed films, which always fascinated audiences and made them wonder if there was something more to fear than just the movie itself. However, as the Dybbuk box legend grew, so did the scrutiny. Journalists, skeptics, and researchers began digging deeper into the story, trying to separate fact from fiction. At the center of it all was Kevin Mannis, the man who first sold the box on eBay. His original listing was dramatic, filled with unsettling details, personal accounts, and suggestions of paranormal involvement. Over time, though, Mannis admitted that much of it was carefully crafted. Mannis revealed that he had invented key parts of the Dybbuk box legend. The backstory of the Holocaust survivor who owned the cabinet, fabricated. The strange events tied directly to the box, exaggerated. The truth, according to Mannis himself, was that he had created the story as a piece of performance art, a modern folklore experiment designed to see how far people would take it. In his own words, the Dybbuk box was not a relic bound by an ancient spirit. It was a narrative, built piece by piece, meant to capture attention and spread fear. This revelation shocked many who had followed the story for years. If Mannis was telling the truth, then what about all the people who claimed to have been harmed by the box? Were they lying? Were they imagining things? Or had their belief in the curse been strong enough to convince their minds and bodies that something supernatural was happening? The Dybbuk box had, intentionally or not, become a living experiment in the power of belief. For skeptics, Mannis's confession was the final nail in the coffin. They pointed to it as proof that the entire saga had been a hoax, a masterclass in how folklore can be invented in the modern age and spread through the internet. But for believers, things were not so simple. Mannis may have admitted to fabricating the origin story, but that did not explain the sheer number of independent testimonies from later owners. People like Jason Haxton continued to insist that their experiences were real, that the suffering tied to the box could not be explained by suggestion alone. This tension between belief and skepticism kept the Dybbuk box in the spotlight. The movie had introduced it to millions, but the ongoing debate kept it alive long after the credits rolled. Even if Mannis had invented the legend, many argued the box had taken on a life of its own. Folklore often works this way. Once a story is out in the world, it grows beyond the control of its creator. People repeat it, add to it, and in some cases, live it. Hollywood had done what Hollywood always does: take a frightening story and amplify it for maximum effect. Yet the Dybbuk box remained unique because it existed outside the film. Unlike other haunted objects that were purely fictional, this one could be traced to a real cabinet that still sat in storage, owned by people who claimed to feel its effects. That dual existence as both a cinematic creation and a tangible artifact gave it a lasting power. The revelation of Mannis's hoax did not kill the Dybbuk box legend. If anything, it added another layer to it. Now, the story wasn't just about a cursed object. It was about the way fear can be manufactured, spread, and believed. It was about the blurry line between truth and fiction, and how entertainment, folklore, and personal testimony can merge into something much bigger than any one of them alone. The Dybbuk box had moved from an eBay curiosity to a Hollywood monster, and even when unmasked, it refused to die. The Dybbuk box may have been unmasked as a hoax, but that has done little to weaken its grip on the imagination. In fact, the debunking only made it more fascinating, because it showed just how far a story could travel once it left the control of its creator. Kevin Mannis may have admitted to creating much of the legend, but the moment he put the words online and let the tale spread, it became something larger than him. The Dybbuk box became part of a cultural dialogue, a piece of folklore that continues to live on no matter how many times skeptics try to tear it apart. That's the strange thing about urban legends. They don't require proof to survive. They thrive on fear, curiosity, and repetition. Once someone hears about the Dybbuk box, they often pass the story along with their own twist or addition. One person might say it causes nightmares. Another might say it ruined their luck, while someone else insists the box whispers at night. None of these claims have to be verified because the story works best in the space between truth and fiction. That's where legends are born and where they take on a life of their own. The internet supercharged this process. Before the age of online forums and eBay listings, folklore traveled by word of mouth, newspapers, or books. Stories could take years or even decades to spread widely. But with the Dybbuk box, the tale leaped across borders in days. Paranormal forums picked it up. Bloggers wrote about it. YouTube channels covered it. Documentaries speculated about its origins. And then Hollywood brought it into theaters worldwide. The box's legend grew at a pace older folklore never could have matched. It became the perfect example of how the internet doesn't just spread myths, it accelerates them. What makes the Dybbuk box so effective as a story is that it blends cultural heritage, fear, and physical reality. Unlike ghosts or demons that exist in vague spaces, the Dybbuk box is a tangible object. You can look at it, take photos of it, and even visit it today. That reality anchors the legend, giving it a sense of authenticity even after the hoax revelation. People might not believe in spirits, but when they see the box behind protective glass, displayed in a museum, they can't help but feel the weight of the story attached to it. And that museum is none other than Zach Bagans' Haunted Museum in Las Vegas. Bagans, known for his television show Ghost Adventures, acquired the Dybbuk box and made it one of the centerpiece attractions of his collection. He leaned heavily into its fearsome reputation, surrounding it with dark lighting, eerie narration, and controlled access that makes visiting it feel like stepping into a ritual. Visitors have reported fainting, crying, or feeling sick near the box. Bagans himself staged events around it, including one where rapper Post Malone touched the box and later claimed to have suffered from a string of bizarre misfortunes. Skeptics argue that all of this is theater, a carefully designed environment meant to trigger anxiety and heighten suggestion. But for believers, those reactions prove the box is still cursed. The tension between skepticism and belief is what keeps the Dybbuk box alive. If everyone agreed it was a hoax, the story would fade. If everyone agreed it was haunted, the mystery would be solved. But because it sits in that middle ground, constantly debated and endlessly retold, the Dybbuk box continues to thrive as one of the most famous cursed objects of the modern era. What's especially interesting is how the Dybbuk box demonstrates the psychology of fear. Humans are storytellers by nature, and we've always looked for meaning in objects and events. When a box is said to contain a spirit, people expect to feel uneasy around it. That expectation alone can create physical reactions, racing hearts, sweaty palms, nausea, then reinforce the belief that something supernatural is at work. The Dybbuk box became a mirror for our fears, reflecting back whatever people brought to it. Those who believed in spirits saw proof of possession. Those who doubted saw proof of how stories manipulate us. And those who simply loved a good scare saw proof that folklore will never die. The legacy of the Dybbuk box goes beyond just one cursed wine cabinet. It shows how folklore evolves in the modern age. In the past, superstitions might cling to crossroads, mirrors, or graveyards. Today, they attach themselves to eBay auctions, online forums, and horror films. The Dybbuk box bridged that gap between old-world mythology and the digital age, showing that even in a world filled with science and skepticism, we still hunger for mystery. We still crave stories that unsettle us, stories that suggest there are forces we can't explain. Even after Kevin Mannis confessed, the Dybbuk box legend has only grown stronger. Some people dismiss his confession as an attempt to reclaim control over the story, suggesting that he only admitted it was fake once it escaped his hands. Others argue that, hoax or not, the real curse of the Dybbuk box is the effect it has on people who come into contact with it. whether through psychosomatic symptoms, sheer coincidence, or genuine paranormal activity. The suffering tied to the box feels real to those who experience it, and that's what gives the legend its staying power. Think about it, folklore doesn't need truth to survive. Ghost stories told around campfires don't require witnesses to sign affidavits. Urban legends about vanishing hitchhikers or cursed phone numbers don't collapse when skeptics debunk them. They survive because they satisfy something deep in us, something that loves fear when it's safely at a distance. The Dybbuk box fits perfectly into that tradition. It's a story that people want to share, a warning that feels timeless, even though it was born in the 21st century. Today, when visitors walk through the haunted museum and stop in front of the Dybbuk box, they are not just looking at an antique cabinet. They are staring at the embodiment of modern myth-making. The faint scratches on its surface, the locked doors, the glass that separates them from all of these details invite their imagination to run wild. And in that moment, they are no different from people centuries ago who whispered about witches' cauldrons, cursed talismans, or haunted relics. The objects change, but the fear stays the same. The Dybbuk box stands as proof that a good story can outlive the truth. It shows us that belief is powerful, that fear spreads faster than reason, and that folklore doesn't need facts to endure. It only needs us to listen, to tell, and to believe just a little. That is why, even today, the Dybbuk box is considered one of the most haunted objects in the world, no matter how many times skeptics point to the man who made it all up. And that, perhaps, is the true curse of the Dybbuk box. Not the spirit said to be trapped inside, but the way it captures the human mind, pulling us into a story we can't quite escape. If you enjoyed this journey into one of the strangest and most chilling legends of the modern age, make sure to like this video. Leave a comment with your thoughts and subscribe to Belmoze for more stories that blur the line between history, folklore, and the supernatural.